Kudos to the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, the owner of the Washington Commanders, Josh Harris, and the NFL Commissioner, Robert Goodell, who were all in town today, announcing that the Washington Redskins are coming back to RFK with a new campus, shopping mall, retail space, unprecedented, and it will be a closed roofed-in stadium. Maybe I'll get to attend the Super Bowl in Washington, D.C., but we love it. It's long overdue. And I must congratulate the mayor. This certainly will be a part of her already growing legacy. So congratulations to everyone for finally giving Washington what it lost and didn't think could ever get back, the Washington Redskins. And I said the Redskins, that's right, because to me they'll always be the Redskins, because I'm not correct and I don't apologize for it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams. You know, I just returned from Cape Town, South Africa. It was a 15-and-a-half-hour fly. I didn't think the thing was going to ever land, but you know what? We're troopers here. I'm here feeling as fresh as the morning dew, and it's so glad to be a part of Your Voice, Your Future. Well, guess what? This week marks 100 days of Donald Trump and his administration. During last year's presidential campaign, Donald Trump constantly repeating his intention to bring about dramatic change as soon as he returned to the White House. But let me tell you something. Dramatic is an understatement. Some people felt it's coming at a breakneck speed. So in the 3 months since he took the oath of office, the 47th president has deployed his power in ways that are just, you cannot compare to any of his predecessors, okay? And in stacks of bound documents signed off with a presidential pen and policy announcements made in all caps on social media, his blizzard of executive actions has reached into every corner of American life. And everyone has been impacted by it. To his supporters, the shock and awe approach has been a tangible demonstration of an all-action president delivering on his promises and enacting long-awaited reforms. But his critics fear he's doing irreparable harm and damage to this country and overstepping his powers, crippling important government functions, and perhaps permanently reshaping the presidency in the process. Let me welcome us back to the studio, Sam Faddis, my man, what's happening? Mike Hahn, what is a Republican strategy? You do strategy for Republicans? Is that what that is?
Yes, campaign strategy, fundraising strategy, mostly all.
So that means you're biased.
A little bit biased.
Oh yeah, you're biased. So Sam, you and I have got to be the objective ones here because we believe in balanced reporting here. So let me talk about and get you both, and if you can put on your hat of neutrality, I certainly would appreciate it, okay? But listen, we're going to discuss at least 7 turning points from his first 100 days, okay? Remember, 3 weeks into Donald Trump's term, it was 10:13 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Vice President J.D. Vance wrote 9 words, Mike and Sam, that signal his strategy, which has since shaped the Trump administration's second term. You know what those 9 words were, Sam? Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power, he declared on X. Speak to that.
Yeah, well, he's right. And I think that this administration has confronted it. They needed to confront it. It's not over yet. We are seeing every day that we have a judiciary that kind of wants to function as, you know, you got district court judges that want to function as president of the United States. There is I think the administration is absolutely correct to fight this. It's completely undemocratic to have, you know, lifelong appointee judges thinking they can subvert the will of a president elected by the people of the United States. We haven't finished the fight yet, and I think there are some fundamental principles here that have to be confronted. This whole business where district court judges can issue nationwide injunctions and claim to be able to command the entire federal government, but based on their own order, I think is completely unconstitutional. And ultimately, we're going to have to confront that directly and say so.
So then what about the Supreme Court, which has pushed back on the president, telling him that we're a nation of laws, there's due process, we're not going to get into the crime of which they're being accused of, but at least due process, bring them back, let them face the courts, and then let them decide, and then we'll respect the will of whatever that process renders. Sam?
Yeah, well, look, I understand fully why the administration wants to avoid arriving at the point where we have a true constitutional crisis. Nobody wants that. But even when it comes to the Supreme Court, the idea that the judiciary somehow is superior always to all other branches of government and command everyone else to do what it orders, even when we're talking about the Supreme Court, is in my mind an incorrect constitutional interpretation.
So you're saying the founders were flawed in their
I don't
thinking?
think that was. I'm saying that the founders didn't. That was not their intention to grant that kind of authority to the judiciary. They were working in terms of a judiciary which had a much narrower view of its power and the scope of its power, and never, I think, conceived that they would. I mean, we're to the point where we're having federal judges issue orders to the commander-in-chief telling him things like, you have to turn around an aircraft in flight and fly back to the United States. Now, if you accept that principle, you accept that the judiciary has that authority, then logically they could extend that authority to anything the commander-in-chief.
So when should they
They
check?
could have F-18s taken off from a carrier and tell them to stop.
When should they check the president, since there are three equal branches of government? Has there been any case that you've seen in the last 100 days where he should have been checked?
No, I don't think. I think that what we have is a whole series of orders by federal judges which are completely beyond the scope of their authority.
But I'm asking a different question. Should he not be checked to keep the balance of power in order? Are you saying that Trump should just have free will and free reign?
No, I am not saying that, but I am saying that the difference between a narrow, very narrow constitutional interpretation and where we are now is dramatic, because what we're really having is judicial orders that are not questions of the Constitution, they're questions of policy.
But the Supreme Court, they are accepting these cases. Let me turn to Mike. The second thing that has happened in this administration, I think many of you remember this image. Elon Musk, dressed in black from head to toe and wearing sunglasses, stood center stage and basked in adulation at CPAC, the richest man in the world, who wants to cut trillions of dollars from the federal government, said he had a special surprise. Argentinian President Javier Milei, known for his own budget slashing, emerged from backstage and handed him a shiny gold chainsaw. How's that worked out for us, Mike? That shiny gold chainsaw that Elon Musk has been using, just cutting and erasing aspects of the federal government. How's that going?
Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask the Democrats, they think it's terrible to cut government waste. But I mean, I don't think we're going to see the effects of what Elon and Doge has done until years down the line. I mean, the fact of the matter is they have cut millions of dollars of government waste, and it's something that many Republicans and frankly many Democrats have ran on too, and they were never able to do it. So it was wild to see Washington react to actual change in the way that Elon Musk brought that to Washington with Doge. But I think we're going to see the effects of Doge down the line. It's going to save taxpayers millions of dollars. People that are 200 years old. They're going to no longer get Social Security. Non-citizens are going to no longer get Social Security. Government waste at USAID is gone, and it's going to be allocated back to the American people. And I don't think we're going to see the effects of that within the first 100 days of the president's term, but certainly near the end of it, he'll have definitely saved the U.S. taxpayer billions of dollars.
And so let me bring this to your attention, Sam. You know, many people see the president as a strong man, but some perceive that he has capitulated in some ways on foreign policy. I mean, he said that he could end the war between Ukraine and Russia, and now they're finally making progress. I don't know why the Kremlin wants to wait until May 10th and not now. I'm sure you're going to explain that to us. I mean, look at what's going on in Iran. I mean, look at the conflict between Israel and Hamas. This is expanding. I mean, look at China. I mean, how would you say the president has done on the foreign policy stage?
I think he's done extremely well. I mean, look, as with so many other topics, under the, this disaster of a Biden administration, the press just basically chose to either not talk about things or to feed a complete fantasy version of what was going on to the American people. So Donald Trump stepped into office and inherited a disaster, right? I mean, we were in the Ukraine-Russia thing, to grab a hold of one piece of what you threw out. We've been sitting here for a couple of years now with the Russians making regular threats to take this conflict nuclear and seriously dancing along the edge of the possibility of a nuclear exchange in World War III. That's where we were. So in 100 days, the President of the United States hasn't managed to get a final deal done, sealed, and delivered. That's not a big shocker. And the fact that Putin will play every game known to man and drag his feet, again, not a shocker. But where we are now, realistically looking at the possibility of having an actual deal and the end to this war, as opposed to the Russians talking about, I mean, the Russians were running videos on state TV of a nuclear strike on London. That's what they were doing a few months ago to get across the point that that's how close we were to Armageddon. So that's a lot of ground to cover. And every place else, Iran, China, Taiwan, everything else, yeah, we got a lot of ground to cover to make up for the disaster of 4 years of the Biden administration.
In Israel?
And Israel as well. Look, the situation in the Middle East, Israel, Iran, the whole package is extremely dangerous right now. We are definitely not out of the woods. We don't actually even know whether the Iranians already have nuclear weapons or are about to assemble nuclear weapons. So we are in grave danger in a whole lot of places. But at least we have an administration that is working to resolve these things instead of either playing for the other side or pretending that the problems don't exist.
Your voice, your future. Sam Faddis, Mike Hahn. We'll be back. So, Mike, there are billions being wiped off share prices. Every second, share prices plunged everywhere following President Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariff announcement. The S&P 500 index of the largest firms listed in our country has been hit particularly hard. And even though the White House has reversed course on some of the highest tariffs, It hasn't fully recovered since. What's the long-term impact? How will they recover? And is Trump gambling? Are you pretty confident that the eagle will land when the dust clears?
I do, and I think that's why the American people elected him too. They trust him on the economy. I mean, we can't miss sight of the target here, and the real target here is China. The fact is that China is the biggest economic and, frankly, militaristic threat to the United States, and we have to do everything we can to try and stop them in their place. So that's why the president's putting 145% tariffs in some cases on them. China has retaliated, but the fact of the matter is that China needs American consumers much more than we need Chinese consumers in the American economy. I think what's getting lost on a lot of people is that when the president put reciprocal tariffs on every other country, he was playing chess, not checkers, with China. What do I mean by that? China would get around the tariffs that the president put on their country by sending their products to other countries and then shipping them out to the United States. By putting tariffs on other multiple countries, China doesn't have the ability to do that anymore. So I think you're going to see the president start to pull back maybe a little bit on some other countries, but the goal here is China and trying to, get right with them for, the economic wrongs that they've done, devaluing their currency, allowing fentanyl into the country, among many other things I'm sure we don't even know about. And they're the real sight here. And I think the American people can absolutely get behind that in addition to rebuilding American manufacturing and making things back at home if China isn't a large player anymore.
How long does it take to build American manufacturing where people begin to see the fact that their economy is getting better? Because this is one of the top 3 reasons why they voted for Trump, because they felt they were losing their way of life financially and no future for their kids and grandkids.
It's certainly not an overnight solution, but the fact of the matter is a lot of this lies with Congress. Congress has to, make taxes more appealing to companies that want to make in the U.S. and the U.S. has to be more competitive for the American companies that are always leading here. We have the workers, we have the space, we have the infrastructure. It's really just the financial incentives that are getting these companies to leave the country. And if Congress does the right thing in the next budget and with the Trump tax cuts and whatnot, we could absolutely see businesses coming back by the end of the first term, by the end of the last term of the president here.
Sam, another big one. A tough stance on immigration was a central plank of Trump's re-election campaign. And the president has used his broad powers of enforcement to deliver that pledge. Illegal border crossing, Sams, are not their lowest monthly total for more than 4 years. And a majority of the U.S. public still backs the crackdown, but it has had a chilling effect on communities of foreign students who have found themselves caught up in the blitz. Now, it's interesting because if you look at these polls, if you believe them or not, I don't know anything in mainstream media, print or broadcast, anything good I've ever had to say about the president. No matter what he does, it's always a criticism. Even when the president was at the Pope's funeral, they made it seem as though he was the only one donning a blue suit. They didn't mention Prince William, and there were 2 or 3 other heads of states who had on blue suits. I mean, it's just outrageous how the mainstream media just wants to malign and just criticize the president. I mean, listen, the Bible says if you find something good in somebody, praise it. They find nothing good to say about him, which is why they're just so distrusting. But saying that, my point is, many people were all for stopping the border crossings, but when you've sort of moved into this other space where it seems as though you're rounding people up, that's a different kind of taste for them, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. People are going to, when they see the actual rough edge of this, if that's the right way to put it, that folks are going to have to be picked up and removed. There are going to be a lot of people that flinch from that. They don't want to deal with that unpleasant reality. I mean, look, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to sound callous. So I'm not trying to be. But the Biden administration, I mean, spewed a lot of smoke and spread a lot of lies, and with a lot of help from their friends in the media. But here's the bottom line. In contravention of American law, they opened the borders of this country. They adopted an open border policy. We stopped enforcing the law. In fact, actually worse than that, we actively took measures to move people here and then transport them into the interior. That was our policy. Now, they lied bald-faced about it continuously, claimed they were trying to do their best. Okay, we see instantaneously as soon as Trump stepped in, the problem at the border was resolved without new legislation or anything else. We've got a whole bunch of folks here who have entered our country illegally. I'm sure many of them are just here trying to make a new life. Some of them are here doing really nefarious things. But irregardless, right, they are here in contravention of U.S. law. And we need to enforce the law. And ultimately, this is going to come down to having to round people up and take them out. Now, is the president focused? Is he aware of that? Yeah. I mean, they are actively soliciting folks to self-deport. They are attempting to facilitate people self-deporting. Nobody's preferred solution to this is going and grabbing people and locking them up. They are looking for every other way out of this. But we're going to have to confront this harsh truth. Yes, people are going to have to be detained and removed from the country.
You know, Mike Hahn, a clash with academia, media, and corporate worlds. You know, on April 21st, Harvard President Alan Garber decided to confront the White House head on. In a letter to the university community, he announced a lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's move to freeze billions of dollars in federal grants. It was, he said, an illegal attempt to impose unprecedented and improper control over Harvard's operations. Now, some people say that Harvard is an outpost for Hamas, an outpost for terrorism, is what some will say. Now, the White House has said it had to take action because Harvard had not tackled anti-Semitism on campus, an issue that Garber said the university was taking steps to address. But the Ivy League college's moves was the most prominent display of resistance against Trump's use of presidential power, Mike, to target American higher education, a long-standing goal energized by pro-Palestinian protests that engulfed campuses last year. Mike?
I mean, the American people watched last year as Columbia was ransacked by pro-Hamas protesters. So when people went to the voting, when they went to vote in November, they voted with that in mind, and they wanted a president that was going to get that under control. I mean, going back to Harvard losing federal money, these are private institutions that have millions, billions of dollars in endowments. And the fact that they think that they're justified to somehow have the federal money without having to comply with any federal law or federal policy is just, it's just typical academia. It's elitism at its finest. They're not entitled to any American taxpayer money. And the president and Congress, they have the power of the purse. Washington, D.C. is ultimately going to make those decisions. And if they don't want to follow federal law, they don't have a right to have any money from the American taxpayer. So I'm not going to sit here and cry boo-hoo. I don't think any American is going to sit here and cry for them. They have to follow federal policy if they want federal money. It's as simple as that. And if they're not going to do it, then the president has every right to do what he needs to do to get them to comply.
You know, Sam, there's been a retreat on race and identity. I remember the press conference as if it were happening right now at the White House, beginning with a moment's silence for the victims of that aircraft collision over the Potomac River. How sad. And I must tell you, Sam, within seconds of the pause coming to an end, Trump was on the attack. A diversity and inclusion initiative at the Federal Aviation Agency was partly to blame for the tragedy, according to him. That's what he claimed. And because it hired people with severe intellectual disabilities as air traffic controllers. I wonder what severe intellectual disabilities are. Now, he did not provide any evidence. Let me just be clear. It was a startling moment, Sam, that was emblematic of the attack his presidency has launched against inclusivity programs that have proliferated in recent years across the U.S. government and corporate world.
Yeah, well, I think what you touched on here, Armstrong, is something really important, which is, you know, I am diametrically opposed to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that just turn into nonsensical things where we're just pushing people irrespective of merit and performance into positions they don't deserve. So I'm absolutely opposed to that. And I think it's an incredibly destructive thing, by the way. It's not only wrong, it's just it has horrible implications in a whole variety of ways. Having said that, as we move through this, we should be really careful about our language and accusations and just announcing that everybody who happens to be a particular color or a particular gender who has a mishap must therefore have been placed into that position only because of DEI considerations. As we're talking about this, we're going through this business with the helicopter crash and some revelations from the New York Times about the fact that the pilot was a female and she ignored guidance from the flight instructor. And of course, all sorts of people want to run with the fact that, well, she wouldn't have been in that seat if she wasn't a woman. She's clearly unqualified. We don't know that. I mean, that might be true. It might just also be true that she was a pilot who made some mistakes and that a guy could just as easily have done the same thing. So, you know, as opposed to as I am to these DEI initiatives, let's just be real careful about as we move through this and very judicious and think what we are saying, because real fast you go from saying we ought to be colorblind to sounding like you're saying something really different and really ugly.
I really appreciate your saying that, and I must tell you, I couldn't agree with what you just said. I couldn't agree more. Your voice, your future. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back with our guests.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. You know, Sam, I want to go back to what you were saying, because I think what you are saying is very important. And it could be very, very dangerous. How do you balance it, Sam?
Well, I just think you have to speak truth, and we have to be clear, and we have to, I mean, at the same time that I was going to say we can't tolerate the the ugliness. In other words, you're going to start attacking this female pilot, God rest her soul, because she was female and she made an error. And from that, you're going to now jump to the conclusion that she obviously was unqualified, should have never been in that position, wouldn't have been in that position but for her gender. Well, you don't actually know any of those things. And that's the example. In this case, she happens to be female, but we could substitute any other factor, right? She could be black. She could be black and female. She could be any other group. And all of a sudden, we're going to say, clearly, this person didn't deserve to be in that position. And more than that, we're going to begin to create an environment in which we tolerate that kind of speech. So there's clearly a balancing act here, because if in fact the truth is that she wouldn't have been in that position were she female and she had failed evaluations in the past and it was obvious that she, okay, well then we ought to follow the facts to that truth. I mean, the way we always put this in the field when we were investigating was something I would always say, we do this by the numbers. We don't decide what the answer is in advance. Let's do a fact-based review here, and let's follow the facts, and we're not going to tolerate prejudice and ugliness, and we don't need to slide back down that slope. So, at the same time, if we in fact have now moved into a world where we are actually putting unqualified people into positions based on considerations that should be irrelevant, then we ought to have the courage to say that as well.
Yeah. Mike, Hahn, you can't, there are a lot of polls that's out now. There are polls that say that Trump has the lowest approval rating in his first 100 days than any president in recent history. There are polls that saying that he's losing his base. And, we talk to people, and they seem to be enthusiastic about the polls. I saw a report that Trump sort of went ballistic when he was told about his poll numbers. How much we should make of these polls, and how should the White House react and not overreact? And what do they really mean for them in the long run?
I don't think they mean much right now. I think obviously as we start to approach the midterms, polls are certainly something that the White House and the various committees are going to want to pay attention to. I think that they are going to make decisions based off of those polls. But then again, I mean, polls get it wrong. I mean, I saw polls 3 weeks ago saying that Trump had his highest approval rating since, including the first term and this term. I mean, I don't know what to believe anymore. The fact of the matter is that it doesn't matter as much for Trump anymore because he's not running again. So it doesn't really matter whether people approve or not. The only thing that matters is that he delivers on what he ran on. And I think in the first 100 days, he's certainly done that. And he's done it probably a little too quickly because no one's going to remember the first 100 days 3 years from now. But I think the fact of the matter is that as we start to approach these midterms, people will have their opinions on certain topics, and those are the topics that you're going to see start to really define the next 100 days as we start to approach political season again, if you could believe it.
Sam, I had an interesting experience. I just cannot figure it out. Coco Gauff, the American sensation, tennis player, was playing in Spain at the Mutua Open, and she had just won. And while she was up speaking, her mic died. And you know how you see all the scores in the background? Everything just went black in the stadium. I said, that's just the strangest thing. I've never seen anything like it. And then during the break, just now, I just saw where there's been a total electrical outage across Spain and Portugal. And I said to myself, that's exact. That was early in the day. I said, for me, it had to be the same thing because that's where they're playing. Yeah. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, it's early, so I saw the same reports that you saw, but I suspect that, I mean, they were recently trumpeting their move to a green new energy grid and so forth, and I suspect one of the things that they have discovered is that that's not particularly reliable. You know, I'm all for saving the planet. I'm not making that a throwaway line. I think we should be good stewards of the planet, and I think we have not always been that way. But there's a lot of this green technology and so-called Green New Deal that, quite frankly, is a lie. It's nonsense.
Well, obviously something didn't work. Let me just with you on this. What do you say, Sam, to people say when it comes to the world stage that no one has ever seen such an unprecedented display of weakness from a would-be strongman in just 100 days, whether the issue is national security or economics in a short period of time, who feel that Trump has gone a long way toward unilaterally surrendering our dominant power and influence around the world, especially in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. And some say the best evidence of this is that combined downward shift of stocks, bonds, and dollar values, something that rarely occurs, suggesting a broad retreat of investment from the United States?
Yeah, well, look, let's just start with this. You were talking to the other guest along these lines a moment ago. Let's just, say this out loud. A vast number of the so-called news outlets are propaganda organs for the people that oppose Donald Trump. And they don't just distort things, and they don't just cover things up. They lie bald-faced. We were talking about the border. Well, we were told with a straight face for 4 years that Joe really wanted to control that border, but he needed to act to Congress to do it. And there's never been an act of Congress since he left office, and yet suddenly, dramatically, that border is completely under control, purely based on the fact that Donald Trump sat down in the Oval Office. So all of that was a complete lie. We could go down this list, right? COVID, et cetera. It came out of a pangolin or a bat or something. We have been fed nonsense. So what? And we were told that Hunter's laptop wasn't real, on and on and on. So now we're going to be fed the lie that Donald Trump is destroying our economy and destroying the world economy. You know what Donald Trump is doing? He's confronting the biggest existential threat to the United States that exists, because we are feeding the dragon. We are literally giving the Chinese Communist Party the money it needs to build the military machine with which it can destroy us. And that's what the Chinese Communist Party wants. I'm not attacking the Chinese people. The CCP wants to destroy us, and for decades now, we've been writing the checks to give them the money to do that. And what he's saying is, we're not going to commit suicide as a country. We're actually going to change this relationship and untangle ourselves from this. And to the extent people have vested interest in it, it's because a whole lot of people are making a lot of money doing business with the Chinese Communist Party. And the God's honest truth is they care more about that than they care about their country.
Sam Faddis, Mike Hahn, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you on our Town Hall, Your Voice, Your Future. Look forward to having you back in the future. And we'll be back to talk about the banking with Todd McDonald, president of Liberty Bank and Trust and a member of the board of directors. We'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Todd McDonald is president of Liberty Bank and Trust and a member of the board of directors. Welcome to the broadcast, Todd. And let me just start. How would you describe the current health and outlook from minority-owned banks like Liberty Bank and Trust in today's economic environment?
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having me here. Really appreciate the opportunity to share our story and to share what we're doing in this country. I would say the economic health of our institutions collectively, we're in a good place. We are trying to leverage the underwriting muscles that we've been building over, decades of lending into communities of underserved families and individuals, overlooked families and individuals, rural and also urban. And so I think while the times seem a little less brighter than before, as we navigate these times, our banks are in good position to be helpful and to serve as we did through many a times during disasters such as COVID, hurricane relief, fire relief. And so we are built to be of service and to provide financial products and services to the overlooked communities here in the U.S.
How much do you will have to, your banking philosophy will have to adjust in an era where DEI, minority set-aside, and a lot of other things that institutions have benefited from are now in question? How do you adjust to fill that void, especially as it relates to the federal government?
So a lot of our institutions don't have or did not have that as a core business model. We use those relationships, that many of those relationships are still in place, but we use the extra income or the extra backing from the government to invest in ourselves. And so while some things will go away, a lot of us are in position to pivot. And we're using our skill sets to, again, show up and be willing and able to work with this new administration and try to be helpful and try to bring value from our sector. We're very good at what we do. When you look at our balance sheets and our performance, we lend to, again, some of the higher credit risk communities, and yet we still receive the money back. If you look at our delinquency rates, we're close to peer group in that regard. And so I feel like with this new administration, the changes that are in front of us, while there will be bumpy or some times that seem difficult, we will navigate through those.
I one time in my history was a board member of Independent Federal Bank here in Washington, D.C. And it is a fact, you guys do some things that are very unique, these community banks, that big banks just cannot do. You guys do absolutely better, particularly in these communities. Talk about the uniqueness of these community banks and the role that you play.
So if you look at our balance sheets, typically the community banks that serve markets that the larger banks don't necessarily provide services to, we're very familiar, we're very hands-on with our lending practices. And so we know our credits, we know our customers very, very well. And I think if you go back to the times during COVID, a lot of community banks provided, millions of loans to our small business sector, which the larger banks just did not have the capacity to do so. And not saying that they were wrong, not saying that we were right. It's just it was a balanced banking industry at that point. And when you look at credits on our balance sheet, for instance, for Liberty, 93% of our loan book are to underserved businesses, underserved families, underserved individuals. And again, when you look at our sector as a whole, community banks fill that void that a lot of larger institutions have not focused on for many reasons.
But you also offer accounts and loans mainly to local residents and communities, and you also invest back into those communities.
Absolutely. our institution, we do hundreds of millions of dollars a year in loans and financial support. We try to hire and preserve a lot of deteriorating communities. And so, for instance, we partnered, and this is the thing, community banks have a lot of strategic partnerships with larger institutions. And we did a very successful initiative in Detroit, Michigan, when Detroit, most of the transactions in Detroit at the time were for real estate were only conducted by cash because banks, you didn't have comparables for collateral, you didn't have a lot of sales. And we went in and stepped up with JP Morgan, and we did a significant amount of business to 4 designated neighborhoods that were selected by the city of Detroit. And we provided renovation loans to many individuals. And that program, we did close to $30 million in a very short period of time, but we only had 2 loans that went bad, just 2. And so when we partner with larger institutions and we use what we've learned, Liberty will be 53 years old in November, then you have magic. You have magic that takes place, and we're blessed to be in position to continue doing what we've done for decades.
Normally these community banks are limited in the amount of money and assets they can have. During my time, it was like less than $1 billion. Has that changed now?
It has, not in a tremendous way. So if you look at the banking sector and the community banking, most community banks are smaller than $1 billion in size. So you are correct. Liberty, we are over $1 billion. And, when you look at what community banks could be used for, typically it's not going to be to finance, a very large transaction. You're not going to finance the purchase of a professional team through a community bank. Typically is with small business owners, individuals that, and when I say small, not a 50,000 revenue top line client. Our probably, sweet spot is right around a $5 million loan. Our lending capacity goes all the way up to 15 to 20 million. But community banks typically don't like to max out because, again, we've been through a lot of tough times in our history. And in order to navigate those times, especially if our organizations are not publicly held, we don't have access to easy capital markets. So we protect our capital in a very sound and responsible manner. And so while we can't, do those huge $100 million loans or $300 million loans, we still are able to participate in the capacity that we feel comfortable with. So for instance, we have a lot of participations with a lot of different banks, regional and very large national banks. And so while that facility may be $300 million, Liberty's portion may just be $10 million or $5 million.
Well, the fact that you're a community bank and you cater to the community, you don't have to focus on capital market demands, which gives you an advantage because you're privately owned.
Correct. Yes.
So as inflation and interest rates pressures persist, how are these banks adapting their strategies to continue serving their communities effectively and providing to them, especially in the mortgage space in your communities?
Mortgage has been down for the last couple of years, and it's due to interest rates, it's due to higher insurance costs. And so we do see a lot of contraction with that loan portfolio. However, with us being privately held, we can make certain decisions around which products we want to push to the communities that we serve. So maybe we may require less of a down payment, or we can go higher on the LTV, or we can go higher on the debt to income side of a mortgage application, and just 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5% in those figures make a huge difference. And so a lot of our institutions are now parking mortgages on our balance sheets. One, because typically a mortgage is a very safe loan product. Typically, You see default happening on the auto side or a credit card side, but most people are going to pay their mortgage. And so when you look at the interest rates associated with mortgages right now in today's market, typically you'll do an adjustable rate mortgage, the good kind, not the bad kind that was presented in the early 2000s or 2008, but really strong 5-year 10-1 ARMs. And that allows banks like Liberty to lock in for a set period of time and not go too long as a 30-year yield like we'll see in different bonds. So as many of us are playing it short from the bond market side, we're doing the same thing with adjustable rate mortgages to still push loan volume in mortgage products.
You know, the other thing I should point out is that community banks really help local businesses and residents to thrive, more so than these huge banks.
I mean, in partnership with a lot of these larger institutions, we actually get introduced by larger banks to very large companies, because a lot of large companies right now, especially with what's going on with the tariffs, they're trying to really figure out how they continuously lower their cost of goods. So typically, we're seeing a lot of larger companies trying to expand their third-party vendor usage. So they're trying to add competition to their providers arena. And so you see a lot of small businesses being incubated by large companies. And since a lot of larger banks typically don't do very small business lending, they introduce us, and they introduce community banks to these large companies. And they say, hey, while we may not have an appetite, while we may not feel as being an expert to lending to small businesses, these are our partners. And you see a lot of these very, very large companies giving million-dollar contracts to small businesses to prove out. These are not startups. These are existing businesses that have something to bring to the table. And with these opportunities, typically you'll find that small business needs capital to mobilize on those opportunities and contracts.
You have a webpage address as we say goodbye?
Yes, absolutely. LibertyBank.net. Again, we're headquartered out of New Orleans, Louisiana. We have physical locations in 11 different states, but we actually bank across the country. So we'd love to earn your business as well as your family and your small business community.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for what you do. I'm Armstrong Williams. Let's thank all our guests, and good night. Your voice, your future.